It is currently 6 in the morning, and it is just a day after a very important day in this man's life. Just 12 hours ago, this lawn that you see on the screen was a literal kingdom. I mean, there was an expensive Mercedes Benz that was parked at the gate. There was a floral arch that took 2 days for grown men to build. There was a stage right here with a white couch. The person that was supposed to be sitting on this couch was supposed to be above everyone else. This was a very important day. He got the opportunity, the once in a lifetime opportunity, to sit right above his 300 guests. All these people came to watch him and his partner. For a mere day, well, not really 24 hours, just a few hours, he got to play king and queen with his partner. There was a live band, there were dancers that were matching in dressing. I mean, there was even a drone in the sky that was documenting everything that was happening. And even walking backwards in front of the couple were two men that made sure not to make a mistake. And they were holding 4K cameras, making sure that none of whatever happens on this special day goes unnoticed or unrecorded. So this man's name is Tawanda, and he is 29 years old, and this is his wedding. Here's the problem. Tawanda is living like a king for just a few hours, but Tawanda does not have land. Tawanda does not own a house. Tawanda doesn't even have savings. Tawanda has no generational wealth. But in one single afternoon, he blew money that he saved for more than a year. What I can't stop thinking about is the very fact that just a few weeks before the wedding, there was a small residential stand that he could have purchased with the amount that he splurged on very few hours of pretending to be king and queen. It is even possible that no one in his entire family has ever owned a house or owned a piece of land, and he could have been the first, but he blew so much money on a few hours of impressing people that don't even care about his marriage. And this particular piece of land was costing the very same amount as having a luxurious wedding, but he chose a luxurious wedding. Why? This year session, we're going to be talking about the most expensive day in a poor man's or poor woman's life, which is the Zimbabwean white wedding. Why do we keep blowing so much money on a few hours when we literally sometimes own absolutely nothing? So welcome back to my channel. My name is Edlin. And if you're interested in whatever it is that we talk about here or whatever this thing is called, please click the subscribe button or and the notification so that you can be alerted every single time I upload a video. So allow me to say the most uncomfortable things. Our weddings have long stopped being family functions or ceremonies, and they've now become productions. Our weddings are now spectacles, they're now a show, they're now carnivals. We now spend too much money that we rarely have just for a few hours of pretending to be special. How can you spend so much money to stage a spectacle for an audience and people that you're probably never going to speak to again? We live in a country where we do not have any inheritance. Most of our wealth actually flows backwards instead of forward because we have to take care of people that came before us instead of leaving inheritance for our children. And yet we are splurging so much money on a single day, something that we can literally choose not to do. Now, get me correctly, I am not actually against weddings. I love weddings, I attend weddings, and I hope to keep attending weddings. But what I am saying is that, is it really worth it for people like us who do not really have much to be spending thousands of dollars on a few hours of excess? People are routinely going into debt, and I know people that have spent years covering the debt that arose from their wedding. You can't rent a lifestyle for 6 to 8 hours to pretend to be rich and then spend the next 2 to 3 years paying off that debt instead of building wealth for yourself and your coming children. Our 2024 GDP per capita, according to the World Bank, is around 1,500 per person. This is the output that an average Zimbabwean produces every single year. And yet, one single nice wedding costs even 5 to 6 times that. I am not here to cancel joy, but I'm here to just ask the question, why are we allowing the extravagance to outshine the real reason why we have weddings? And this is just a family ceremony. And for us Africans, especially Zimbabweans, we hold two wedding ceremonies. Ebola is also a wedding ceremony, but it is largely unrecognized because of our colonial past. And then we have to do another wedding ceremony, which is considered to be a white wedding, and which is usually reinforced by the church. So the white wedding was introduced to us by colonial religion. This is something that Westerners or Europeans did. We merely adopted it because we also adopted their religion. And for decades, if you only had a lobola ceremony, you were not considered really married. You were considered to be living in sin because of the church. So many Africans had to adopt the white wedding for them to be considered officially married. And as I'm talking about this, I am casually reminded of Never's Conditions by Tsidangaremba, where Tambu's mother and her father had to marry because apparently they were living in sin. So they had to do a whole white wedding, and this was very disturbing for Tambu. So before I go any further, we need to understand why we wear white. Why is it considered a white wedding, and what's the history behind the color white? So what happened is in London on the 10th of February 1840, a young 20-year-old queen whose name was Victoria got married, and she wore a white dress. But you see, before this, white was actually a color of mourning in certain parts of Europe. Brides simply wore their best dress to their wedding. It didn't matter the color. As long as it was the best dress that they owned, they could wear it to the wedding. So when Victoria actually wore this, she was heavily criticized for it because they considered this to be too plain for a wedding. So if it was criticized, how come all of us these days wear white to a wedding? Well, number one is the fact that white was extremely difficult, especially in those days, to keep clean. So when Victoria actually wore this, it was actually a statement to say, I'm rich enough to just wear a dress that I can only wear once. It's not like today when we actually have a lot of detergents, a lot of methods to keep our white clothes white. So it was just the extravagance of her wearing that dress only for that particular day that made it stick. And the second reason is the fact that it was splashed all over the media. So it was all over the newspapers, it was all over the adverts, it was all over the fashion plates, and they promoted this idea of white being the color of purity. So it was commercialized and sold across the British Empire as the true model for romance and respectability. So obviously, as Zimbabweans, we were once part of the British Empire. We were colonized by the crown, and this culture was exported to us by colonialists and missionaries. So like I always mention, Zimbabwe is around 84% Christian, and the missionaries did not just bring their God, they also brought a ceremony, the wedding, the white wedding. And this wedding was very specific. It was an English Victorian era ceremony. It had a white dress, it had an aisle, and it had the common, you may kiss the bride. So if you don't really know the history of the white wedding dress, you'd think that is an old tradition, but it is actually less than 200 years old. It is not that old at all. It is simply from the Victorian era. So in the early 1900s, the wedding acted as a public signal. It was a social signal for Zimbabwean black middle class people to show that they had a better status. It was a way for them to display their new status and respectability. So the only reason why this is so common and all of us have accepted this, it is because of the church. The church is the one that reinforced this in our society. Our actual tradition actually had nothing to do with a spectacle. It was just one cow, one goat, and two families on a homestead having a meal and sharing a meal and getting to know each other and appreciating each other with gifts. So culturally, our own wedding as Bantu people was not that expensive. It was more family oriented than being a spectacle. So in Zimbabwe, you can actually get legally, fully, and properly married for around $25 at the magistrate court. Not quite sure if the figure is correct, but the last time I checked, it was $25, and we could just say maybe it would be around $50 for you to get married to your partner. So the marriage that costs roughly 15 to 20,000 US dollars, and a marriage that costs something like $50 are both the same kind of marriage according to the law. But how come people only end up choosing this type of marriage because maybe they can afford to have this and never really make a decision to just quit spending thousands of dollars and just having this one because it's budget friendly? Well, it's kind of obvious. It's because the $50 wedding cannot be posted on social media. There are no drone shots of the magistrate office. No cameras are allowed inside the courtroom. There is no slow motion. There is no confetti. There is no sparks. It is just boring. This type of wedding does not impress anyone. And remember, the real reason why we have extravagant weddings is because we want to impress people. The court wedding does not allow you to be the center of attraction. I actually decided to run the numbers up so that I can at least have an idea of what I was talking about. And decor can run somewhere from around $200 to around 2.5. But if you're having a really, really nice wedding, it would cost you somewhere about 500 US dollars. And for you to hire a venue, especially in Harare, is going to be very expensive. It will be somewhere above 2,000 US dollars. And then when it comes to catering, depending with the amount of guests that you're going to have on your wedding, it would cost you, I think, a minimum of around $900, especially if you're having 300 guests and above. Then we're going to talk about the lighting, because majority of people these days are actually having night weddings, so there's going to be need for lighting and effects, right? The confetti, the sparks and everything. It can cost you somewhere around 250 to around 500 US dollars. And then there's the planning and the coordination, the transportation, the logistics, the dresses that are going to be hired, the hairdressers, the suits, the dresses, the chairs, the tables, everything else that you're going to need on that particular day. It is going to cost you around 200 to around $500. And we didn't even touch on the cake. We didn't even touch on the rented cars, because remember, when you're getting married, you can't use a Corolla. You have to use a Mercedes Benz or a hired Rolls Royce, and this costs money. We didn't even talk about the band. People are invited to perform, or people are invited to train the bridesmaids and the groomsmen how to dance. We didn't even talk about the cake. The cake is one of the most important things at a Zimbabwean wedding, and we didn't even talk about how pricey it can be. We didn't talk about the cameras, and we didn't talk about the band. There is usually a band or people that are hired to train the groomsmen and the bridesmaids on how to dance, because you have to dance for your guests. So if we round all these figures up, a normal nice wedding in Harare could cost you somewhere from 5,000 or around 6,000 US dollars. Just come to think of it, how many months someone has to save to hold 6,000 US dollars in Harare? I'm talking about an average Zimbabwean. Remember, we said that Zimbabwean GDP per capita is around 1,500 USD. This is the economic value of an average Zimbabwean per year. So if you hold a white wedding and spend 5,000 to around 6,000 US dollar in a few hours, you've literally swallowed up the economic value and output of an average Zimbabwean for up to 4 years. And for that amount of money, 5,000 to 6,000 US dollars, you can make a down payment for a stand right here in Harare. Instead of renting out wigs and renting out expensive dresses and renting out Rolls Royces for just one day, you can literally just buy a piece of land, something that you can own for the rest of your life. But before we even judge people for doing this, we need to understand why people keep making the same decision year after year, why people keep splurging when they literally have no money. Why are people creating WhatsApp groups to literally guilt trip relatives into contributing to a wedding that they cannot afford? Why are we performing wealth that we never owned? Why are we borrowing against a wage that we have not yet earned? So the main reason why people, even if they're broke, choose to have white weddings is the church. This is the institution that introduced this entire concept to us, and it has been very, very essential in reinforcing it across the country throughout the decades. Because if you really think about it, in most Zimbabwean churches, especially the missionary kind of churches, even if you pay your lobola, even if there's a traditional ceremony, even if you considered married according to a culture, in most of these churches, it is not enough. It is not adequate. You cannot become a full member unless you have a white wedding. In the eyes of the church, historically, you were considered to be living in sin unless you had a white wedding in church. They call it kubatanizwa in the church. Although technically you can have the kubatanizwa without the reception or the after party, it is literally encouraged to have both. So people usually just end up having both. So it is not just social pressure from your friends, it is usually religious pressure. You get accepted in the church more when you have a white wedding. So this kind of makes people aspire to have a white wedding so that they can be approved as married in the church. A couple can literally be together, be faithful, have multiple children, live together, be in love, and still not be considered full members of the church because they did not have a white wedding. And this is called the duplication of marriages, where Europeans only need to have one wedding, but Africans have to have their own traditional wedding and then have to have the white wedding on top of that to just be considered married. And to be honest, in most of these churches, they actually consider lobola to be an inferior type of marriage than a white wedding. And this is exactly why people feel the need to splurge on white weddings. The second reason why I feel like we have weddings even though we cannot afford it is the wedding industry complex. Wedding has been marketed as not just being a family event anymore. It has been marketed as being the most important day in your life. The wedding is no longer just you getting married and your family being there. The wedding is now content. It is now something that separates you from the rest. It is something that is marketed, especially to women, as the day that you are the most important. Remember, the white wedding mainly centers the woman. The bride is the most important thing on that particular day. That's why she's the one that wears white. She has to wear a veil. She has to have special types of shoes. She's the one that is the center of attraction. So because it is marketed as the most important day in a woman's life by capitalists, industrialists, and business people, this subconsciously creates a need in young women to have that white wedding. So their desire to have a white wedding sometimes can end up overpowering the fact that they cannot afford it. It overpowers their budget. They really don't care about that. They just care about being validated as the most important person on this particular day. Sometimes you can end up being blinded by the materialism and the overconsumption that she does not see that this is simply capitalism at work. She then forgets that it's just a few hours and it doesn't mean anything. Majority of these people don't even care that you're getting married anyway. Majority of us have seen adverts. We have seen adverts on decor, we have seen adverts on catering, we have seen adverts on dresses, we have seen adverts on wedding dresses, we have seen adverts on venues. These people intentionally market these things to grow a desire in us to spend money on these products. These people are simply making a living. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you do not have enough money, then you should not spend any just to get a few hours of fame. There's nothing wrong with getting married. There's nothing wrong with having a white wedding if you want to. But why is everything rented when you do not have money? Why is the suit rented? Why is the dress rented? Why is the venue rented? Why is the car rented? When you don't have something, you should not spend what you don't have because you can end up getting in debt. And by Monday the next week, you will not even remember what it felt like. Almost nothing that you've actually paid for that particular day survives the weekend. On Monday, it's already gone. The flowers have already wilted. The cake is already finished. You're already in debt. But there's only one thing that survives, and that is the footage. It is now an essential in a Zimbabwean wedding for you to have camera people and videographers for them to capture the very important moments on your wedding day. This is the fastest growing limb in the entire industry. In actual fact, if you actually calculate, you see that you spend more money sometimes hiring the videographer than even feeding your guests, because the footage and the video from the wedding is the actual product. Everything that we're doing here is for that particular footage and for that particular video. So the car goes back, the suit can go back, the food is gone, and the flowers die. Everything physical evaporates in 48 hours, but the video remains forever. That film is a receipt. It is the proof that for one day in your life, you were somehow wealthy and you were the center of attraction. Although I'm talking about this, I completely understand that for many people, the only day that they will ever be special or even be seen is their wedding. We grew up in a culture where extravagance is only tolerated if it's your wedding. This is the day that you're allowed to be the center of attraction. A lot of people have never felt that important to people like on their wedding day. So it makes sense why people are so drawn to being the center of attraction on their particular wedding day. There's so many women that have never worn makeup, have never worn a nice dress, have never felt important. And the only shot that they have to feel like a celebrity is their wedding. So I kind of understand where it comes from, but my only concern is that you are spending money that you do not have to feel some sort of important for a few hours. I feel like it's not worth it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the wedding if you can afford it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you spending that amount of money if you can easily pay it back. But the problem comes when you plan weddings that you cannot afford. And I'm not naive. I'm not going to lie that all human beings do not want some sort of status. Human beings don't want to impress others. Every one of us does things to impress other people, but to what extent? Are we really willing to allow this culture of extravagance to derail us from progress in our lives just because we want to impress people for a few hours? These people that are spending thousands of dollars that don't have it on weddings just to impress people are not foolish. They're simply trying to fit in a society that ranks people based on status. For a person that has no inheritance, that has nothing that is saved up in his savings, spending thousands of dollars should not be a priority. I feel like buying a piece of land or even spending money on something useful in the family is much more plausible. I know there's so many people that are even in church praying for a wedding. Instead of praying for good relationship. They're busy praying for the spectacle. Why? Because they want to be the center of attraction for once in their lives. And I completely understand it. But there's so many other healthy ways to become a center of attention, because I understand that all human beings actually need attention. We are social creatures. We need people to admire us. But at the end of the day, it is not worth that $1,000 price tag. But again, it's just my own opinion, and that's why this is just a yap session. My only concern is that we are normalizing extravagance in weddings when we can't afford anything in a country where majority of us earn less than $200 every single month. For me, that social pressure is unhealthy, and people must feel comfortable having weddings that suit their budget. My name is Edlin, and thank you so much for watching this video. See you in the next one. Ciao.